So thank you, Steve and Nancy, for joining us here at the Sober in Seattle podcast. And this is going to be the first in a year-long interview with Steve and Nancy on the 12 steps. And so because it's January, we're going to be starting with step 1. So that's going to be our conversation today. Hi, Steve and Nancy. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Lara. And hey, Nancy.
Thank you for inviting us, and hello, Stephen.
And so I guess I know I've known you guys for a long time, and I know that you have worked the steps in repeatedly in different fashions. And I went through a Floyd Henderson workshop that you facilitated at one point last year, or maybe it was actually even in the year before that. I think it's been a couple of years now, but that was fascinating. And so I just wanted to because you guys have a lot of experience working the steps and out of the book, and I wanted to get your input on step 1 and what you think is important and about step 1 and the process, and just some conversation about that. So, Stephen, did you want to start with
okay.
that?
Again, thanks for the invitation. And so my comments about step 1 are from a 36-year experience with the steps. And I think what turned out to be most helpful to me, sticking with step 1, we admitted we're powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. I saw it as one dynamic. So inside of me, I guess, I drank and then as a result of the drinking, my life was unmanageable. So I came into AA and I kept coming to AA, and I quit drinking. And it seemed unfair that my life was still a mess. I didn't see, of course, when I drank, my life was unmanageable, but I found out, and it took me a long time to see that not drinking didn't make my life manageable.
Yeah.
And that's the part that seemed unfair, but I didn't have if it's spiritual maturity or just maturity, to see that they were two separate things. But of course, there was a link. The drinking naturally made my life unmanageable. And as I understood AA when I first came in, and I went to a lot of meetings for a lot of years, I got the idea that your life should be manageable if you quit drinking. And that despite what the book, our book clearly states in several places, but that one place it says elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. Another place it says cessation of drinking is like the first step in recovery. I just saw it as one thing. And what helped me see the difference was when I finally was willing to listen to a mentor or sponsor, or whatever word you want to use. My experience with sponsorship was I didn't have one for the first 3 years because I didn't need one. And in the beginning, of course, all I went to were what they call at meetings, first step meetings, and I would hear people's drunkalogs. So and of course I had one. And so I would associate the first step with a drunkalog, which could have been very helpful to me, and probably was many times. But I've come to see that a drunkalog is a drunkalog, examples of how I behaved when I drank. But it didn't address the not drinking and life being unmanageable. And I didn't have a way to address that, the unmanageability of my life, and it was. And of course, in AA, you hear, we'll work the steps. So I worked the steps the first time or whatever. Like I didn't have to work. Oh, I just want to talk about step one. I didn't get step one. I would hear often at meetings that it's the only step you have to take 100%. And I thought that meant 100%. I don't drink. In fact, one thing that I used to carry around because it made me feel kind of important is I was asked, "Hey, Steve, did you have a drink today?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, there's no one in all of AA on the whole planet Earth that's not had a drink any better than you have." And so that would make me feel good. But I associated the completion of step one was just not drinking. And looking back again through experience, if I would have had a mentor or a sponsor to help me see the second half of the first step, I think I could have avoided a lot of misery in my life. And one of the reasons I'm excited to even be part of this podcast is maybe somebody else doesn't have to go as long as I did without seeing that. To me, the 11 and a half steps deal with how to live a free, happy, and joyous life. And
I just had a quick question about that.
sure.
You are clearly differentiating powerlessness or the unmanageability as a direct result of drinking versus the unmanageability as a direct result from alcoholism, untreated alcoholism.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right.
And the mistake I made cost me a lot of suffering in my life and misery, and to other people too, because I've seen with me, they're related. Of course, if I'm drinking, my life's gonna be unmanageable. But the powerlessness over alcohol, it was real simple after I had some good mentorship or sponsorship. I have the allergy to alcohol. I start drinking, can't stop. And when I've stopped, I start again. And I couldn't control that. The same story as, the thousands of people I've seen in the last 36 years into AA too. But it didn't solve the unmanageability problem. Okay, Nancy.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Something that you said kicked off the thought process in my mind that you mentioned, and I was right there with you in those early days. And my understanding of AA after one day in AA was that if I stop drinking, all my problems will go away, and that life should be manageable if I stop drinking. And I stopped drinking. And I believed, I had an unfounded belief that if I just went to meetings, I would sometimes hear a comment that people would get it through osmosis or wouldn't get it. And I was like, I'm not getting it through osmosis. I am not getting it by just sitting here and breathing. And by the end of my first 3 years, in AA and not drinking, my life was chaotic and crazy. It was not happy, joyous, and free. And that baffled me because I did think if I'm not drinking, I should be better. I was also very aware that I was all still involved in a lifestyle that made me crazy and chaotic and guilty and depressed. But I didn't see a way out of that. For me, the word that sums up step one is honesty. Is our step says we admitted that we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And that admission, it needs to be an honest admission, right? Because without that, I'm just going to be treading water. Even if I'm in AA and going to meetings, I'm going to be managing the steps my way. Instead of, if that admission is honest and there's an actual surrender there, then I will be seeking direction and I will be answering questions which are put to us, in our book, like the questions about untreated alcoholism that are on page 52. Are you having trouble with personal relationships? And I'd be like, well, yes, and this is 3 years sober, yes. Can you control your emotional nature? No, and are you a prey to misery and depression? Oh, yes, I totally am. If my boyfriend doesn't call me every day, then I'll be very upset, and I have to keep all that from my husband, So it was very, when the questions were put to me, then I could answer them in an honest way. But I didn't want to answer them in an honest way when I was managing my program by myself, because I thought I had to protect this little deal that I had going. Fear ran the show, and I didn't know how to step out of the bind that I was in. So you mentioned the Floyd workshops that Stephen and I do, and we've done a lot of them, and we both chuckle to ourselves because we know that we needed to do as many as we've done and continue to do, because this message becomes more and more clear to us every time we do it. And that is what we want, because, believing that we can't transmit what we don't have, and an understanding of that powerlessness and the way it's broken down as a physical allergy, meaning that just like any physical allergy, I don't control the physical. If I'm allergic to any other a food or a nut or whatever, if I have a nut allergy and I eat a nut, I do not control what happens to my body. Floyd explains it the same way. I put in alcohol, and that I don't need epinephrine. I need, I break out in a craving for more alcohol. That is how the allergy manifests. And so it explains that very well. So a physical allergy manifests. Now, if I was a normal person, I would just not have alcohol because that reaction was very negative. But there's a mental obsession that is coupled with that physical allergy. And that mental obsession, there's at first this message of relief that's in my mind when I drink alcohol. And then gradually the negative effects outweigh the positive benefits eventually. And yet I don't stop because the original message is still playing. This is how it's explained in Floyd, that our subconscious mind, that all of our beliefs and our thoughts, our emotions that we can't understand why I'm feeling the way I do, that there is an answer, but it's buried in our subconscious. And so the answer is to bring that, what's in the subconscious, to the surface, which the subsequent steps help with. But being faced, as our book says, with alcoholic destruction, and that can be in the bosom of AA, being faced with that destruction, that despair, it gets us to that level of honesty that we need, where we say, I can't do this. I cannot do this. I need this help, because without that motivation, we will just continue to try to manage ourselves. I remember going to our first workshop, and the leader of the workshop, who was Emmett, he knew Stephen and I before we got into the workshop. We had met several times. He knew that at least I was just in the worst state of my life, in a lot of self-destruction. And sitting around the circle that day, he looked at me and he just said, "Step one, done right." And you know what? That actually gave me a little comfort.
Right. So it's like the when it talks about in working with others, sometimes the more hopeless, the better. There's really, I want to talk a little bit about how important it is to surrender in order to, because they talk about first step being the only one you have to work 100%, which, or not you agree with that, there is definitely something essential to surrender in step one. Can you guys talk about that?
Sure. What I found out was I will never surrender anything that I still value. And I think that's part of the dynamic of surrender, whether we're talking about a battle in a world war or what. Nobody surrenders unless they value they're surrounded and whatever. So the idea to surrender anything can sound good, but I've noticed I can't do it if I still value it. And one of the most helpful things that ever happened to me in Alcoholics Anonymous, and of course, when I came in AA, I saw many what I would classify as well people, happy, sober, useful, fun people. And I don't know how they got around it. I mean, I don't know how they did it, but all I could think of was everybody would tell me, you should do this, you should do that, you should, work the steps. And nobody can argue with that direction. But what generated the desire to go to this workshop was I met a guy, and I just spoke at a meeting, and he said, "Steve, do you know what your problem is?" And I thought that was an odd thing for a guy to say to me. And he said, "You're insane." And I didn't take any offense to it. I thought, here's a guy that knows. And so he didn't talk to me about what I needed to do. The way the workshop was introduced to me was, let's see what the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, let's see what they did. And of course, it was on like a line-by-line basis, and my life changed. I got to be a part of many other people whose lives changed, and it hasn't stopped. Whatever, 30 some years later, I no longer valued at that time what I thought. What I valued was I wanted to see how other people got well. And it was just maybe because of oversensitivity of being an alcoholic or whatever the psychological reasons are. It was let's see what other people did that got well. And I felt a physical surrender at the time, like I'm surrendering my idea of what I should do. And so that's my little story on surrender.
I agree with everything you said there. And I think that idea of surrender, which can bring up a lot of different ideas in different people's minds, like, I'll never surrender, don't tell me what to do. That's actually kind of our baseline attitude towards life. And look where it's gotten us. And then this idea of surrender is another way of saying it, and you'll recognize it, Stephen, is I will resign as my own teacher. And that with that resignation, I think that that begins in step one. at least we see that my life is not happy, joyous, and free. My life is chaotic, and it is painful, and it's crazy, and I'm not at peace. I am anything but at peace, and I have an idea in my mind that this time I'll be able to manage it, but it leaves me in a darker and darker place. So this willingness to surrender or resign begins in step one. And I think the other steps, they help us kind of gently like open the grip that we have on our life, to a power greater than ourselves, which we'll talk about in future months, to where we are happy to let it go. But that happiness, that relief of letting it go begins in step one with self-honesty that I cannot do it. Maybe something else can. Maybe these people, as you said, maybe these people who are demonstrating a far happier life than I have, even people who have very similar backgrounds and stories and situations. As we were taught, listen for the similarities, not the differences, because we become living examples of, I know exactly how you feel, and I don't feel that way anymore.
So step one, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. We got to look at like you said, Nancy, the physical and the mental part of the disease, and then have spent a lot of time talking about the unmanageable part, which I think that there's the beginning of the journey to wellness. And again, the surrender, it sounds so good in a meeting. Just, Steve, surrender, give up, turn it over. Turn it over. And I would say, okay, or I'll go home and pray on it. That's always a safe thing to say in AA. But I didn't have the maturity to see I was valuing my idea on what I should do. And again, when I was presented with the thought of, let's see what these other people did and they got well, that's what I've passed. That's what I try and pass on. Let's see what these people did. And that was, it wasn't attacking my belief systems in any way. It was just, here's what they did, and here were the results. And
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I was reading a book by Richard Rohr this morning called Breathing Underwater, where he outlines the 12 steps. And I was reading the first step this morning, and he talked about in that book about how essential the surrender of the ego is in step one. It's really an ego deflation. That step one isn't about, and spirituality isn't about adding things, it's about taking things away. And which I thought was really interesting as far as all our ideas. And we talked about step one last night, and at some point of the book where, our ideas didn't work, but the God idea did.
Yeah.
I asked my sponsee, so do you have any more good ideas? Because if you have more good ideas, then the ego won't let you get to that essential point of surrender that needs to happen. And so, and how many people that we know personally that have died from alcoholism, unwilling to surrender or unwilling to admit that they were truly powerless over alcohol?
Well, I think that's where Nancy and I have actually been helpful before. You're saying unwilling to admit, and I know they use that phrase in the book, but from my experience, I didn't feel I was unwilling. I was unable. I just didn't get something until this guy just said, Steve, your problem is you're insane. And it went to my heart. And I thought, he's right. I'm insane. I
And see, and that insanity, as we learn in Floyd, because I don't think he's giving you a diagnosis of insanity, but they equate insanity with not being sober,
yes,
with emotionally intoxicated, this emotional intoxication. And sometimes I needed at least 3 years, in AA, trying to manage my hangovers, my emotional hangovers, growing more and more ashamed because I wasn't managing them, and life the noose was tightening. And so that, but drawing us to a place of surrender, to a place of, I can't do it. I can't do it. All my ideas, even sober, my own ideas regarding what's my best interest, have proven to lead to more problems. So you're right. And I don't know, I can't comment on people that an unwillingness to surrender. I have experienced that as well, and the effects of that. But our early mentors used to say, that's an experience too. It is all an experience that we are having in order to decide, what is it that you want? Happy, joyous, free, or more chaos and more crazy? And if it's happy, joyous, and free, then here are the steps we took.
well, you just went and made everything simple again. So maybe that's as far as we wanted to go today. I see Laura still on the phone. She can probably erase this part. Good job, Nancy.
Good job, Stephen.
So anyway, how would you want to sum everything up? That we couldn't do step one by ourselves. We needed the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Well, we in our case, that did help. But step one done right, kind of. I didn't need any help in managing my life, so I thought, and that did bring me to an admission of powerlessness, which is step one.
Okay. I think we're done, Lara.
That's it? Okay. I think that's great. Thank you for being flexible. I really
Well, thank you for being flexible. I mean, it was you who had to kind of divide your presence. So thank you for that.
Yes, I love this, and I love talking to you guys. And well, I look forward to step two. I can concur with at 3 years of sobriety being totally insane. That's when I got married the first time. Lucky him, right? Right. Anyway, it definitely is an experience to have massive unmanageability in sobriety, and so I'm with you on that. And
You were always a little ahead of us. You got married at 3 years. We got divorced. So.
Okay. No, that means you were ahead of me. All right. Thanks, you guys. I look forward to next month. Bye-bye.
Yeah. See you soon. Bye.